Thomas Carter was not the kind of man who was easy to approach. At 38, he already owned Carter Group, a corporation spanning real estate, technology, and finance. People called him the ice billionaire because of his perpetually cold face, a voice steady and flat like a financial broadcast, and a rigid schedule so precise that even the Swiss watch on his wrist seemed obliged to follow it. Thomas once believed he understood the world well. Money bought loyalty, contracts bound people. But a few years ago, the betrayal of a close business partner had left a deep crack in him. Since then, Thomas had been wary of everyone, including those working inside his own home. Strangely enough, despite his immense wealth, he couldn't seem to keep a maid. Most lasted only a week. Some were far too curious, others clumsy, and a few even dared to accidentally take sparkling belongings out of the mansion. Thomas never bothered to explain. He would simply drop one curt word: fired. And so, every few weeks, Carter Group's HR department had to post another ad: housekeeper and personal maid for Mr. Carter. Everyone knew this was a job, high-paying but nearly impossible to survive. That morning, Thomas sat in the grand living room, flipping quickly through the file of the latest applicant. He didn't expect much. The next one would be just like the rest, either overly polite in a fake way or far too ambitious. Until the door opened and a female voice rang out. "Good morning, Mr. Carter. I'm Diana Jefferson, here to interview for the position of enduring the most difficult boss in the city." Thomas looked up, his brow furrowing. The woman before him looked to be in her early 30s, tall with a neat figure, brown hair tied back, eyes bright with a hint of mischief. She wore a simple office dress, no designer label, but clean and proper. "I don't recall that phrase being in the job description," Thomas replied dryly. Diana shrugged with a smile. "Oh, I read the online comments. People said, Carter House is like a ninja training camp. Anyone who survives a week there is basically a superhero. I thought I'd try my luck." Thomas paused slightly. It was rare for anyone to dare speak to him that way, especially at a first meeting. He folded the file shut and asked bluntly, "Work experience?" "I used to work at a hotel, cleaning and providing room service, then moved on to childcare. Oh, and I also acted as a mediator for couples who argued frequently. Basically, I know how to clean, cook, and make people less grumpy." Thomas shot her a sharp, icy glance. "I don't need a comedian. Too bad, because joking is my instinct. But don't worry, I can still make the floors shine." He inhaled shortly, suppressing irritation. But deep down, the corner of his lips almost wanted to lift. Strange. "Anything else I should know?" Diana hesitated slightly before answering. "I'm a single mother. My daughter is 6. Sometimes I may have to bring her along if I don't have anyone to watch her. If that's not acceptable, I understand." Thomas locked his gaze on hers. Usually the mention of a child was enough for him to cross out a candidate immediately. His mansion was no place for kids running around. But somehow the honesty in her eyes made him not want to say no. "I'll give you a 1-week trial," he said at last. "But don't get your hopes up. Most don't last until the 7th day." Diana laughed as if he had just told a joke. "Then I have a chance to set a record. I've always liked challenges." She extended her hand for a shake. Thomas froze for a moment, then reluctantly touched it. Her palm was warm, soft yet firm, completely at odds with the frost inside him. When Diana walked away to begin her first day of work, Thomas remained still for a while. He told himself, "It's only a week. She'll end up like the others." And yet, deep within, a faint sound stirred, like sunlight slipping through a crack in the door. Maybe this time will be different. Thomas Carter never trusted anyone. Especially after countless disappointments, his trust felt like a crystal glass dropped onto stone, shattered into so many pieces no one could ever mend it. That was why whenever a new employee set foot in his vast mansion, only one thought crossed his mind: how long will it take for them to reveal their greed? Diana Jefferson, the new maid hired that very morning, seemed different. But Thomas refused to be fooled by those sparkling eyes and that playful smile. Too many times he had seen people pretend to be virtuous, only to later squeeze him for money and exploit his trust. That afternoon, Thomas came up with an idea to test her. He decided to stage a little play. His study was a room few ever entered, except for cleaners. It was a large space floored with dark wood, high ceilings, one wall of glass windows overlooking the garden, and another lined with towering bookshelves. In the corner stood a sleek safe, as sturdy as a miniature fortress. Thomas opened the safe, pulled out a few stacks of crisp bills, and deliberately left the door ajar, dropping a few notes on the floor where they could not be missed. Then he leaned back in his leather chair, arranging himself as if exhausted from work and drifting into sleep. In reality, behind half-closed lids, he observed everything. His heart didn't race from anxiety, but from curiosity. This was nothing less than a game he always won. A soft knock sounded at the door. "Mr. Carter, may I come in?" It was Diana. She pushed the door open, carrying a mop and a bag stuffed with cleaning tools. Her demeanor remained light and easy. She even hummed a cheerful little tune. Thomas kept his expression neutral, tilting his head slightly as if in deep sleep. Diana began dusting the bookshelves, moving around the room. Then her gaze landed on the safe. Thomas tensed, his heartbeat giving one sharp thud. She had seen it. A few bills lay scattered on the floor, glowing green in the crisp shine of $100 notes. Diana's eyes widened briefly. Thomas could almost predict what would come next. She'd bend down, pick them up, and slip them into her pocket. But what happened instead left him frozen. Diana didn't pocket the money. She bent down, gathered each bill, smoothed the edges gently, and placed them neatly on the desk. Then instead of leaving the stack in a messy pile, she began arranging it, first into a square. She frowned and changed it to a circle. Finally, with a soft laugh, she shaped the money into a heart. From the chair, Thomas had to use every ounce of self-control not to leap up. A billionaire who had witnessed every kind of scheme was now struggling to keep still because of one action. Strange, whimsical, and oddly endearing. And that wasn't all. Diana pulled a yellow sticky note from her pocket, scribbled a few lines, and stuck it beside the bills. "Money needs to be tidy too, so it can multiply better, boss." Signed with a round little smiley face. Thomas was stunned. His throat tightened with a feeling he couldn't quite name. He had seen people fight tooth and nail for his money, trick and steal to grab more. Never had anyone used his money to make a heart and leave a playful note. Diana carried on cleaning, cheerfully dusting the window panes, seemingly oblivious to the fact that her boss was asleep. She even sang softly, her clear voice echoing in a room that had only ever known the dry sound of pages turning. Thomas couldn't hold it back any longer. A laugh escaped his lips. Diana startled, spinning around with wide eyes. "You're awake?" Thomas coughed quickly, trying to recover his stern expression. "I just woke up." She squinted playfully. "Just woke up, yet laughing out loud like you've been watching a comedy show?" He stayed silent, at a rare loss for words. For the first time in years, he had truly laughed. Not the forced curve of lips before reporters, but laughter rising straight from his chest. "I didn't know you had a habit of shaping money into strange patterns," Thomas finally said. Diana flushed but remained casual. "At home, my daughter and I like to arrange coins into flowers or hearts. She says money is like seeds. When you keep it neat, it grows into more. I thought I'd try it with your bills. Who knows, maybe the Carter Group will earn a few more billions." The remark was so naive yet so charming that Thomas had to inhale deeply just to stop himself from laughing again. After Diana left, Thomas stared at the heart-shaped stack of bills and the small sticky note. A foreign feeling spread through his chest, a strange lightness, as if the dark clouds, long hovering overhead, had parted briefly to let a sliver of sunlight in. He muttered to himself, "A maid shaped my money into a heart. What does she think I'll do with that childish nonsense?" But instead of feeling annoyed, he found it funny. Funny enough, the corners of his mouth wouldn't stay down. That night, as he left his study, Thomas carried the sticky note with him. He placed it carefully in a private drawer, one that had only ever held contracts and financial reports. Something so small, yet so unlike anything he had experienced before. And he admitted, though reluctantly, for the first time in years, Mr. Carter had truly laughed. The next morning, the mansion on the hill awoke to the scent of early sunlight and footsteps as light as a cat's. Diana arrived earlier than scheduled, carrying a small basket with a few bright lemons, a bundle of daisies she had picked up quickly at the market, and a dazzling smile like a ribbon tied around a brand new day. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," she called just as Thomas passed through the hall, espresso cup in hand as always. "You're 13 minutes early." Thomas checked his watch. "I don't encourage working overtime." "I'm not working overtime. I'm warming up the house before hours." Diana winked, raising the bouquet. "This place is a little short on human vitamins." Thomas didn't reply. He was busy ticking off the bullet points in his planner, as usual. But even after stepping into the elevator, he could still hear her christening the new day for the house. "Come on, grandfather clock. Let's sweep away some sleepiness. And you, Persian rug, try not to shed too much today." The elevator doors slid shut. Somehow the corner of Thomas's lips twitched. He reminded himself, "Don't get soft." All morning, Diana moved through the house like a breeze that laughed. She stuck a note on the fridge. The kitchen's cute rulebook. 1. Wash hands. 2. Smile once. 3. Don't let pots sulk. She pushed open the kitchen windows so sunlight could pour in, placing a bowl of lemons in the middle of the table like a tiny sun. "Why lemons?" Thomas asked casually as he passed by, his tone still even. "Because when you see yellow, your brain believes life isn't so bad. Plus, lemons absorb odors and stress." "That's my science," Diana answered matter-of-factly. "Your science seems mostly based on feelings." "Feelings are a science too. It's just one that doesn't get much funding from the rich." She grinned. Thomas almost countered, but before he could, he heard music. Not the refined concertos he usually played while working, but a light, upbeat tune that made his hand want to tap along. Diana had it playing softly from her phone, volume low enough for herself alone. She wore an apron, whisking pancake batter, humming. At the chorus, she spun once, apron puffing like a dancing skirt, flipping the spatula as if it were a guitar. Thomas stood at the kitchen doorway, neither stepping in nor walking away. There was a strange pull, music, sunlight, the smell of butter, and the image of a woman cooking while laughing. For the first time in a long while, his kitchen felt like a kitchen. "Oh!" Diana turned and caught him. "Sorry, I forgot to turn off the music. I'll—" "Leave it," Thomas interrupted, faster than he intended. "You're making pancakes?" "The less sugar, more hope version," she said, flipping one with a perfect plop. "Want to try flipping one yourself?" "I don't." You manage an entire corporation. I believe you can manage a spatula." Diana pressed it into his hand, stepping back, eyes bright, as serious as a judge. Thomas eyed the round pancake waiting in the pan. He had never flipped a pancake in his life. There were countless areas in which he excelled: mergers, capital allocation, and risk management. But this buttery circle suddenly felt like a high-risk venture. He swallowed, counted beats, and flicked his wrist. The pancake flew, spun halfway, then thud, landed on the pan's rim, half on the floor. Diana's lips pinched into a smile. "Brilliant! A pancake that knows how to break boundaries." "I'll have the pan's rim redesigned," Thomas muttered, though his ears flushed faintly. "No need." Diana quickly scooped up the fallen bit, tossed it, and wiped the floor. "Next time, feel the rhythm. Like this. 1, 2, 3, flip." She turned her pancake smoothly, like a magic trick. Thomas realized his hand was tapping a rhythm on the counter without his noticing. He quickly shoved it into his pocket. "You've got good rhythm." Diana tilted her head. "I don't dance." "I didn't invite you to dance, just a pancake." They both laughed, not loudly but enough to let the high ceiling breathe. Diana's optimism wasn't loud. It crept into corners through blunt words and little quirks. She stuck googly eyes on the vacuum robot and named it Sir Roomba. That afternoon, as Thomas walked through the living room, he found her crouching, speaking to the robot. "Now, Sir Roomba, that corner is the house's emotional gray zone. Clean carefully, all right?" "You are talking to the vacuum?" Thomas paused. "Yes. After a lifetime of observation, I've learned adults only listen when you turn them into cute objects. Thought I'd try it with Sir Roomba. With me, you don't need to turn me into an object. In that case, listen to this. You need one afternoon without reports, Diana said straight out, looking him in the eye. Just one, to give this house some laughter. Her directness made Thomas falter for a beat. Very few people dared tell him not to work. But Diana's sincerity carried no ulterior motive. It felt like a prescription for a house starved of a soul. I'll consider it, he replied shortly. Perfect. I'll issue a free ticket for that afternoon. She smiled, pulling a scrap of paper from her pocket. Ticket, one laugh, plus one glass of lemonade. He placed it on his desk like a special signature. By noon, when Thomas left his study, he heard singing again from the kitchen. This time, it was a classical piece turned pop, soft as butter. He slowed by the doorway, his shoes tapping unconsciously on the marble. Diana was peeling fruit. At the song's peak, she couldn't resist spinning once, apron flaring, strands of hair escaping her bun. Again, Thomas leaned against the frame, voice low. Are you planning to open a dance studio in my kitchen? I'm running an anti-boredom class. Mandatory students, everything in the house. She replied lightly, still slicing apples. Want to join? I told you, I don't dance. Then whistle. She tilted her chin, lips curving. I heard you earlier. Thomas blinked. Had he really whistled? He didn't remember, only the tapping in his chest, and then somehow, sound had slipped out. An instinctive release, like water finding a path. I didn't. He almost denied it, but her mischievous eyes stopped him. He changed course. Fine. One note. He whistled a short phrase, clean and precise like a comma. Diana clapped dramatically, as if she'd witnessed a world-class performance. Bravo! A huge improvement over this morning's pancake. Do you grade everything? Yes, but I only hand out certificates when someone chooses to smile. She softened, eyes warm. Thank you for smiling in your kitchen. Thomas turned to leave, but stopped. He glanced around. Sunlight sketched bright strokes on the walls. The bowl of lemons glowed like an exclamation point. The cute rulebook clung cheerfully to the fridge. And from the living room, Sir Roomba buzzed by, its googly eyes wobbling in agreement. His house, once cold as an executive office, now bore fingerprints of life. That afternoon, Diana moved on to the library. She didn't rearrange the books. She knew Thomas hated that, but dusted their spines, murmuring a few titles as if greeting old friends. At the neglected piano, she lifted the lid and tried a chord. The sound rang out, awkward, like a guest who had forgotten its manners. You play? Thomas appeared at the doorway, his shadow stretching across the rug. I press keys. Playing is still under negotiation, Diana joked, tapping a few notes into a bright, water-drop phrase. This piano is sad. Do you know why? Because no one plays it. Because no one was happy when they did. She closed the lid and turned to him. May I open the library windows every morning? Let the light in. Books need sun, too. Thomas studied her longer than usual. His gaze was no longer simply assessing. It was measuring something else, the temperature of the house and of himself. All right, but avoid direct sunlight on the rare manuscripts, he said quietly, almost a whisper. I'll give them sun hats, Diana teased. Don't, he stopped, then, unexpectedly, smiled. Just use the curtains. She laughed and the sound spread, climbing the shelves, curling under the rug, softening the gray abstract painting on the wall, even though no one had touched it. Later, as Thomas prepared to leave for an evening board meeting, he fumbled for a second with his tie. Usually he tied it as fast as signing his name, but today his fingers slipped, leaving it slightly crooked. Diana passed by and paused. May I? She asked. When he nodded, she stepped close, her hands light but firm. I learned to tie ties because I used to help my father before his night shifts. At that closeness, Thomas caught the faint scent of soap on her hands and a cool fragrance like fresh leaves. She leaned in, tied it neatly, straightened it, then stepped back. Her smile was neither triumphant nor submissive. It was simple, like saying, done. Thank you. Thomas murmured, his voice lower than usual. You're welcome, Diana blinked. Tomorrow I'll teach you a Windsor knot. It looks softly powerful. I already have power, he replied firmly, though his smile betrayed his satisfaction. Then add soft, she shrugged. In the elevator, Thomas caught his reflection. The tie was perfectly straight, yet strangely, what altered his face wasn't the knot. It was the faint glow at the corner of his eyes, the kind that only appeared after leaving a room with laughter. That night, returning late, Thomas walked slowly down the hallway. The mansion was no longer entirely silent. Somewhere, the ceiling fan hummed softly. From the kitchen, vanilla and butter still lingered, like a memory of morning. On the shoe cabinet sat the bowl of lemons, serene as ever. And on the fridge, the paper ticket, one laugh, plus one glass of lemonade, had been stuck back, now with a pencil note, redeemed half today. Thomas stopped at the library door. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out yesterday's heart-shaped sticky note. Money needs to be tidy too, so it can multiply better, boss. He placed it beside the new laugh ticket. Two tiny scraps of paper, two small jokes, yet they became tiny milestones on the emotional map of a house once frozen over. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply. In his mind, the equation was as simple as arithmetic. Daisies plus lemons plus a song plus half a fallen pancake equals laughter. Childish. Silly even. But in the end, the thing adults least wanted to admit was exactly what rescued them from drought. Thomas switched off the lights. Just before the door closed, he heard Diana's voice in the distance, probably talking to Sir Roomba, saying, "Tomorrow, sweep in another layer of sunshine, all right?" He shut the door, and the smile arrived with the dark. For the first time in years, the house truly held laughter. And strangely, it made everything, even a man of steel, feel lighter. Saturday morning dawned with a sky as clear as freshly polished glass. Diana entered the Carter mansion with eyes a little uneasy. Beside her walked 6-year-old Jasmine, clutching a teddy bear missing one ear. "I promise I'll be good," Jasmine whispered, her dark eyes sparkling. "Yes, just for today. I couldn't find anyone to watch you," Diana answered softly, then bent down to add, "Remember to listen and don't run around, okay?" Thomas had a lighter schedule than usual and was sitting in the library reviewing reports. The sound of a child's voice drifted in, strange, almost foreign, like something from another world. He frowned. Children were something he avoided. They were too noisy, too unpredictable, and worst of all, too capable of shattering a heart he had worked hard to keep frozen. He stepped into the hall and saw Diana with the small girl at her side. She wore a pale pink cotton dress, her hair in two uneven pigtails tied with ribbons, which only made her look more mischievous. "And this is—" Thomas's voice dropped. Diana straightened immediately, almost shielding her daughter behind her. "Jasmine, my daughter. I couldn't find anyone to care for her today. I'm sorry. If you'd prefer, I can—" "It's fine," Thomas cut in shortly. His voice was neither loud nor warm. "She can stay." Diana exhaled in relief. Jasmine, meanwhile, stared wide-eyed at the stern man before her, then shyly said, "Hello, Uncle." Thomas froze. It had been years since he'd heard anyone call him something so innocent. To everyone else, he was Mr. Carter, Sir, or worse, the billionaire Carter. That single small word, Uncle, threw him off balance for a moment. Diana busied herself in the living room, while Jasmine sat obediently on the sofa, hugging her bear. But children never sit still for long. Within minutes, she was up, wandering curiously. Her round eyes scanned the abstract paintings, the towering bookshelves, until they landed on the crystal vase in the center of the room, tall, filled with white lilies. She tilted her head and whispered to her bear, "So pretty, but, kind of sad." She rose on tiptoe to touch a petal. At that instant, a sharp clink rang out. The vase wobbled, then toppled, shattering against the wooden floor. "Oh no!" Diana spun around, horrified. Shards of crystal scattered, flowers broken. Diana's face went pale as she rushed forward, pulling her daughter behind her. "Mr. Carter, I'm so sorry. I'll replace it immediately." Thomas emerged from the library, his gaze cold. Disorder was something he despised, and that vase had been a rare keepsake. Diana braced herself for his anger, but Jasmine didn't hide behind her mother. She stepped forward, eyes shimmering with unshed tears yet shining with courage. "I'm sorry, Uncle. I didn't mean to. I just wanted to take a closer look." Then, to the astonishment of both mother and master, Jasmine knelt and began gathering the flowers, unfazed by the shards. Diana panicked. "Sweetheart, careful! Don't touch them!" "It's okay, Mama. I just want to fix it," she said firmly. She fetched a small ceramic vase from a side table, carefully arranging the unbroken lilies inside. The broken stems she bundled together, wrapping them gently in tissue. Within minutes, a new vase of flowers stood there. Not perfect, but natural and innocent, like a child's artwork. "There, done!" Jasmine looked up, eyes shining. "I'll call it the vase that stood back up." The room fell silent. Diana didn't know whether to laugh or cry. As for Thomas, he stared at the little girl. Something strange stirred inside him. Not anger, but wonder. A child had broken something valuable, yet instead of hiding or fearing punishment, she had used her innocent imagination to turn the damage into something new, while offering a genuine apology. Thomas slowly crouched, meeting Jasmine at eye level. "Why did you do that?" "Because if something breaks, you can make it beautiful in another way." "Mama said so," she replied simply. "And you look sad. These flowers are meant to bring you less sadness." Thomas's chest tightened. He couldn't remember the last time anyone cared about how he felt. Diana watched nervously, waiting for his verdict, but Thomas simply stood, then said to the little girl, "The vase that stood back up, not bad." Jasmine's eyes lit up. She tugged her mother's hand. "See, Mama, I told you, he's not scary at all." Diana flushed. "Jasmine," and for the first time in years, Thomas chuckled softly, brief but real. That afternoon back in the library, Thomas found himself dwelling on an unfamiliar thought. This house had held only silence and flawless objects for years, but it was a broken vase, gathered and reimagined by a child, that finally gave the place a soul. He realized the greatest lessons didn't always come from conferences or boardrooms, but from a 6-year-old girl with bright eyes and small hands. "The vase that stood back up," he murmured, lips curving slightly. And to his surprise, he felt as if his own heart had stood back up a little after so many heavy years. The Carter mansion had been designed for lavish parties. The dining room stretched so long that even with 10 people seated, it still looked empty. Chandeliers glittered, cutlery shone in precise rows. Yet since it was built, Thomas had never truly used it for a meaningful meal. Most of the time, he ate quickly in his office or had his assistant bring food in. But today, words left his lips that startled even himself. "Miss Jefferson, tonight, cook me a meal. I want to see if your taste can satisfy someone as discerning as I am." Diana, wiping down the kitchen counter, snapped her head up. Her brown eyes lit up as if sparked. "Oh, so I'm being invited to dinner with the boss? Is this an honor or a test?" "Both," Thomas replied evenly, though a flicker of curiosity hid in his eyes. "Then you'd better be ready, because my cooking isn't fancy. I cook to eat, not for magazine photos." Thomas raised a brow. It had been a long time since anyone spoke to him so casually, like he was just a man, not a powerful billionaire. Diana chose simple dishes: creamy pumpkin soup, green salad, and roasted chicken with honey glaze. The aroma spread quickly through the vast kitchen, chasing away its usual chill. Thomas entered, his jacket off, wearing only a white shirt. He rarely set foot in the kitchen, yet now he stood watching her closely. "Why, honey?" he asked. "Because it's both sweet and warm," Diana said, eyes on the tray of chicken. Difficult people often need a little sweetness to soften their hearts. Thomas cleared his throat, masking how directly her words had struck him. "You think I need softening?" "Not just need, desperately need," she teased with a quick grin. "Mr. Carter, you frown too much. Soon you'll have 3 extra wrinkles." He stiffened slightly. From anyone else, that would have cost them their job. But with Diana, he didn't feel irritated. Instead, he felt lighter. When the meal was ready, Diana pulled out a chair across from him. I expected you to sit at the head of the table, a whole meter away, like some aristocrat in a movie. I don't like theater, Thomas said, sitting beside her rather than at the head. That would feel like a board meeting. Good. At least now we can hear each other chew, Diana quipped, nearly making him choke on his drink. He glanced at her. She was happily munching on salad, without the slightest pretense. Her unguarded air stood in stark contrast to the lavish dinners he'd attended, where everyone smiled politely while second-guessing each other. So, what do you think? She asked when he tasted the chicken. Thomas chewed slowly, deliberately keeping his face serious. It's decent. Just decent? Diana put her hands on her hips. I spent all afternoon marinating that chicken. If you're grating like that, I'll just make instant noodles tomorrow. He broke into laughter, real, unrestrained laughter. The sound filled the wide dining room, surprising even him. All right, delicious. Truly delicious. I rarely compliment anyone's cooking. Then I'll take it, Diana shrugged, though the pink in her cheeks betrayed her pleasure. The meal continued in an unexpected warmth. Conversation, laughter. Diana shared stories from her hotel job, including a peculiar guest who demanded room service at 3 a.m. because his dog had barked. I told him, "Sorry, sir, I clean rooms, not do therapy for dogs," she recounted, eyes sparkling. Thomas chuckled, shaking his head. You do know how to surprise people. Good surprise or bad? Haven't decided yet, but his voice carried amusement. Diana casually added another piece of chicken to his plate. Eat more. People who frown frequently often appear to lack energy. I don't frown. You just frowned saying, I don't frown, she shot back. Thomas went quiet for 3 beats, then laughed again, this time openly. As dinner wound down, Diana poured him a glass of honey lemonade. This is a healing drink. If you don't feel better after this, you can deduct it from my paycheck. Thomas took a sip. The sweet, cool taste slid down his throat, bringing a strange comfort, simple and peaceful. He looked around the table, 2 plates of simple food, a vase of daisies, and Diana had placed in a ceramic. The atmosphere wasn't luxurious, but it eased his heart. A memory flickered. Long ago as a child, he had meals like this. His mother's laughter, his father's spoon tapping in rhythm. All gone now, buried under mountains of contracts and sterile banquets. And tonight, inexplicably, that memory returned. He turned to Diana. She was finishing a piece of bread, eyes bright and carefree. For the first time in years, Thomas realized he didn't feel alone in his own home. The dinner ended with more laughter than he'd had in 5 years combined. As Diana cleared the table, he found himself saying, "Tomorrow night, if you're free, maybe we can try another dish." Diana looked up, narrowing her eyes playfully. "Planning to turn me into your private chef?" "No," Thomas answered slowly. "I just want to have dinner with a friend." Diana froze for a moment, eyes flickering with surprise. Then she smiled, a soft, warm smile. "Then it's a date, friend." Thomas left the dining room with an unfamiliar feeling. Friend, a word long absent from his life of power and isolation, had returned, clear and warm, thanks to an optimistic woman who dared spar with him through witty lines. Walking the empty hall, he thought, maybe this house had finally found its laughter, and maybe so had his heart. Still following the story? If this story found you outside of Soul Stories, we invite you home, to where every touching tale begins with truth, hope, and heart. That afternoon, the Carter Mansion's grand living room was bathed in pale golden sunlight. Thomas rarely left his desk to sit there, but one object had pulled him away from his reports. The antique pendulum clock, the only keepsake left from his father. It had stopped ticking long ago. Thomas had hired more than a few specialists to repair it, but each one had shaken their head. Mechanism too old, missing parts. And so the clock remained still, a cold monument to time frozen. Thomas touched the wooden frame, exhaling softly. He didn't know why today, of all days, the silence felt so empty. Just then, Diana entered with a cloth over her shoulder. "Mr. Carter, may I dust this clock?" "Careful, it's fragile," he said, eyes fixed on the motionless hands. "If it's already broken, there's nothing to lose," she replied lightly, tilting her head. Mind if I try something? Thomas frowned slightly. If seasoned experts couldn't fix it, how could a maid? Yet when he met Diana's bright, confident gaze, he found himself nodding. She slipped off her rubber gloves and turned the back panel. With just a few simple motions, click. Aha! The spring is stuck. You know antique clocks? Thomas asked, surprised. Not really. I just have a knack for tinkering, Diana said, pulling a small hairpin from her pocket and nudging delicately. She leaned close, listening intently, so focused that Thomas caught himself holding his breath. A moment later, tick, tock. At first hesitant, then steady, rhythmic. The second hand began to creep forward. Thomas's eyes widened. Impossible! See? Diana grinned in triumph. I may not be rich in money, but I'm rich in tricks. He laughed aloud. The sound echoed in a room used to nothing but drafts. Strange how, with a hairpin and a bit of daring, Diana had awakened a sound he thought was lost forever. Thomas stood gazing at the clock, then spoke slowly, as though drifting back in time. My father loved it. He bought it when I was 8 years old. Every night he'd wind it up, reminding me, the clock must run, just as life must go on. He paused, his eyes dimming. The last time I heard its tick was the night he died. After that, it stopped completely. Diana stayed silent, resting her hand gently on the wooden case, listening. She didn't prod or question. That quiet understanding prompted Thomas to continue, something he rarely did outside of business. I tried to repair it many times, but it stayed silent, as if to say that the happy time had ended. I grew used to the silence. He gave a faint, bitter smile. Until today, the steady tick-tock filled the room, seeping into its corners. Thomas's throat tightened. He turned away, not wanting Diana to catch this rare softness on his face. Yet when he glanced back, she only offered a small smile, her eyes full of understanding. Maybe the clock was never broken, she said gently. It was just waiting for the right person to wake it up. Thomas stared at her. No one had ever said anything like that to him before. Silence lingered until Diana broke it with a laugh. Well, see? My little tricks came in handy. I should add antique clock specialist to my resume. Planning to compete with professional repairmen? Thomas asked, the corner of his mouth lifting. Why not? I just beat them at their own game. They both laughed. Their voices mingled with the tick-tock, brightening the once gloomy room. That evening, after Diana had gone home with her daughter, Thomas remained in the living room, eyes on the clock's moving hands. In his mind echoed her voice. I may not be rich in money, but I'm rich in tricks. For the first time in years, Thomas felt the urge to share his story with someone, and strangely, that someone wasn't a partner nor a therapist, but the maid who argued, laughed, and had just restarted his father's clock. He brushed his fingers against the glass, whispering as if to his father, I'm still moving forward, Father, and maybe, this time, I won't be going alone. For 10 years at the helm of Carter Group, Thomas Carter had built the image of a man of steel, a face of stone, strides decisive, words clipped like bullet points. He was so notorious that the media passed around a running joke. If anyone ever makes Thomas laugh, they deserve a place in financial history. But lately, employees began to suspect that the joke had expired. During meetings, Thomas sometimes smiled. Not the stiff, polite smile of business courtesy, but a real one, however fleeting. Once an assistant even swore they heard him chuckle quietly while checking his phone, something unheard of. Then the news spread quickly. Mr. Carter had eaten cake in his office, a slice of warm apple pie, fragrant and homemade, not from a five-star restaurant, but from the mansion's kitchen. And people whispered that the new maid, Diana, was the baker. The boss ate cake made by the maid? Someone whispered in the break room. He's only ever eaten food prepared by private chefs. I also heard he said it was good. Another chimed in, eyes wide as if witnessing a phenomenon. In just a few days, the gossip had spun itself into a whirlwind across Carter Group's top floor. Among the whispers, more than a few assistants felt it was unfair. They had spent years studying, climbing ladders, fighting for a chance to stand near the boss. And yet, a maid, employed only for a few weeks, had somehow changed him in a way they never could. "She must have an agenda," one assistant muttered to a colleague in the copy room. "Mr. Carter never trusts anyone. Why her?" "Exactly. Women like that are clever. Wouldn't surprise me if she ends up with her own room in the mansion." The words were quiet but sharp enough to feed a wave of suspicion. Eyes began to follow Diana whenever she came to headquarters to deliver files or carry documents from the mansion. Diana didn't care much about the rumors. She was too busy with work and her daughter. Still, sometimes in the elevator or a hallway, she caught the whispers trailing behind her. One afternoon, delivering reports from the mansion, she passed by a meeting room. The door hadn't closed all the way, and voices inside carried clearly. "Sir," a male assistant spoke, "I believe the boss being overly friendly with a maid is inappropriate. It could damage your leadership image." "That's right," another voice joined in. "With all due respect, but she's not of the same class. Mr. Carter, kindness can easily be exploited." Diana froze, her heart pounding. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but her feet rooted to the floor. Silence inside. Then Thomas's voice rang out, low and firm. "Enough." No one dared breathe. "You say, not the same class?" He pressed, each word sharp. "Let me tell you this. She is more honest and more capable than many who call themselves experts." The air turned heavy. One assistant tried to protest, but Thomas continued, "I would rather put my trust in someone who knows how to laugh honestly and live genuinely than in people who wear masks all day and talk about class. If anyone brings Diana into gossip again, prepare your resignation letter." Outside the door, Diana stood frozen. She had never imagined that cold, distant man would defend her so fiercely. She hurried away before anyone could open the door, her steps shaky, caught between embarrassment and a strange warmth. In her life, few had ever stood up for her, certainly not so openly in front of senior staff. She whispered to herself, "I'm just a maid. Why would he?" That evening, back at the mansion, she was still unsettled. Jasmine noticed her mother's silence and asked, "Mama, what did Uncle Carter do to make your face red?" Diana startled. I'm not blushing," but her hand brushed against her chest. Inside, her heart was still fluttering with an odd new rhythm. A few days later, Thomas passed the kitchen and saw Diana making apple pie. He slowed, hesitating. "People say if I eat too much of your pie, it'll ruin my image." Diana turned, feigning seriousness. "Then you'd better stop eating it." Thomas raised a brow. "You want me to give up apple pie?" "No," she laughed. "I want you to eat double, just to give them more to gossip about." This time Thomas couldn't hold back. He laughed, loud and unrestrained. The sound filled the kitchen, so much that Jasmine came running in, laughing too, without even knowing why. And so the mansion that had once been cold and silent echoed again with the warmest sound of all, the laughter of a family not yet named. Sunday morning, sunlight poured across the gardens of the Carter mansion. Diana packed a picnic basket, sandwiches, a few bottles of orange juice, and an old kite that Jasmine had insisted on bringing. "Mom, today let's go to the park. I want to fly my kite." Jasmine cheered, hopping on her toes. "All right, let me finish cleaning the kitchen, and then we'll go," Diana replied while wiping down the table. Jasmine suddenly stopped, eyes sparkling as if struck by an idea. Just then, Thomas stepped out of the living room in his white shirt and tailored trousers, ready to head to the office, even on a weekend. "Uncle Carter," Jasmine cried, running to hug his leg. "Come have a picnic with us today." Thomas froze. His schedule for the day was already packed. 2 virtual meetings, 1 contract to review. The words "I'm busy" almost slipped out, but then he caught the clear, pleading eyes of Jasmine and hesitated. "Picnic?" he repeated in his steady baritone. "Yes, with sandwiches, orange juice, and a kite." Jasmine beamed, holding up the colorful paper kite. "It'll be so fun." Diana jumped in, embarrassed. "I'm sorry, Mr. Carter. Jasmine doesn't realize how busy you are." "I'm free. I can go," he said abruptly, surprising even himself. Quietly, he texted his assistant to cancel the day's schedule. The park was only a 15-minute drive outside the city. Though famous for its rolling lawns and clear lake, Thomas had never once set foot there. When the car stopped, Jasmine bolted out, squealing with joy. Diana spread out a checkered blanket and set down the basket. Thomas stood awkwardly for a moment, stiff amid the noise and bustle. He was used to boardrooms, not families on picnic blankets. Not sitting down? Diana looked up, squinting playfully. Or are you planning to negotiate contracts with that tree over there? Thomas chuckled under his breath. He took off his jacket and sat beside her, still a little stiff. But when Jasmine proudly handed him the first sandwich, the awkwardness began to melt. Eat, Uncle. Mom and I made this one together. It's got lettuce, ham, and a little cheese. Thomas took a bite, chewing slowly. The taste was simple, yet strangely better than any luxury meal he'd had. Not bad, he murmured. There it is again. Not bad, Diana teased. You actually want to say it's good, but you can't bring yourself to. Can you? He glanced at her, lips tugging upward. Maybe she was right. After eating, Jasmine pulled them both onto the lawn. Come on, my kite has to fly the highest. I've never flown a kite, Thomas admitted. Then today's your lesson, Diana said, placing the string in his hand. Don't worry, 6-year-olds can do it, so can you. He stared at the reel of string, then at the flimsy paper kite. To him, the whole thing seemed pointless. But as Jasmine ran ahead, hair flying in the wind, something in his chest lifted. You have to run too, Diana shouted, tugging him along. And so Thomas Carter, the stern man whose strides usually crossed red-carpeted conference halls, found himself sprinting across grass, kite string in hand. When the kite caught the wind and soared skyward, he burst into laughter. A full, booming laugh, free and unguarded. See? Jasmine clapped. I told you, you could do it. Later, the three of them rested beneath a large tree. Jasmine invented a game of tossing paper balls. One throw went too far, hitting Thomas squarely and spilling orange juice down his crisp white shirt. Oh no, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, Jasmine gasped. Diana panicked too. I'll wash it right away, Mr. Carter. But Thomas laughed, so openly that both mother and daughter stared in shock. He unbuttoned his jacket, leaving the stain to spread. It's just a shirt. Honestly, I feel better when it's not so perfect. Diana froze. In that moment, he wasn't the exacting billionaire boss, just a man, letting himself enjoy being ordinary. The sun dipped low, casting a golden glow over the lake. Jasmine, exhausted from play, fell asleep in her mother's arms. Thomas sat across, silently watching. He realized the joy of the day hadn't come from numbers in a report or a deal closed. It came from a child's laughter, from a clumsy sandwich made with care, from a kite climbing into the sky. Softly, almost to himself, he whispered, maybe happiness really is this simple. Diana lifted her gaze, meeting his. In the quiet of dusk, no words were needed. Both of them understood. Some moments are small, yet powerful enough to change an entire heart. That noon, the Carter mansion was quieter than usual. Thomas had just finished a virtual board meeting and walked down to the dining room only to notice there was no familiar aroma drifting in from the kitchen. He frowned, a strange unease rising in his chest. He searched the ground floor but saw no sign of Diana. Just then, a soft cough came from the small lounge next to the kitchen. Thomas pushed the door open and found Diana slumped against the wall, face flushed, eyes shut tight. Jasmine sat beside her, panicked. Uncle Carter, Mama has a fever. I don't know what to do. Thomas froze. In all his years running a corporation, he had handled billion-dollar deals and media crises, but this moment left him flustered. It's all right, he said softly, stepping forward to support Diana. Her skin burned with heat, her forehead damp with sweat. Diana opened her eyes, lips trembling. I'm sorry. I must just be exhausted. Let me rest a little, and I'll be fine. Quiet. Don't talk, Thomas ordered, but his voice carried unexpected gentleness. He lifted her into his arms as carefully as if the slightest force might break her. Diana's eyes widened in surprise, her heartbeat stumbling. It had been so long since anyone had held her like this, safe, steady, and warm. He laid her on the bed and tucked the blanket around her. Jasmine sat at the edge, clutching her mother's hand. Watch over her. I'll do something, Thomas said before realizing he had never cared for a sick person before. He hesitated, then declared, I'll make porridge. The Carter kitchen had rarely seen such chaos. Thomas rolled up his sleeves, pulled rice from the fridge, but fumbled, unsure how to wash it. Water splashed everywhere. Grain spilled over the counter. Jasmine stood beside him, frowning like a tiny schoolteacher. Not like that, Uncle. Mama taught me. Wash the rice twice, then add water to cover and turn on the stove. Thomas listened seriously, following step by step. When it came time to add minced meat and ginger, he clumsily shook in too much salt. Jasmine yelped, Uncle, that's way too salty. Mama won't eat it. Thomas scratched his head, grimacing. I'm only good at signing contracts, not signing off on seasoning. They stared at each other, then burst out laughing. The tension eased, and the kitchen, once filled only with the clink of silverware, now echoed with chatter and laughter. At last the porridge was done. It was thin, ginger-heavy, but at least edible. Thomas carried a bowl upstairs. Sitting beside the bed, he patiently blew on each spoonful to cool it before feeding it to Diana. She opened her mouth reluctantly, too weak to resist, and not wanting to offend him either. The porridge was salty, spicy, strange at best, but it was the way Thomas carefully fed each bite that brought tears to her eyes. It's delicious, she whispered, her voice trembling. Don't force yourself. I know my cooking's awful. Thomas smiled, his eyes unusually tender. But for the first time in my life, I want to take care of someone. Diana looked at him. His deep eyes were no longer cold. They glowed so warmly her heart trembled. She realized then that the icy walls surrounding this man were beginning to melt. By afternoon, Diana had drifted into sleep. Jasmine curled against her mother's side, while Thomas sat quietly in a chair by the bed watching. He reached out to brush a few damp strands of hair from Diana's forehead, his touch so careful, as though afraid to wake her. In that moment, something heavy stirred in his chest. Not pity, not duty, but a deeper desire to protect these two, not for a day, but for always. He had thought happiness was found in rising profits, in soaring stock prices. But now, looking at Diana's tired face, in Jasmine's peaceful sleep, Thomas understood. True happiness was this simple: having someone to care for, and someone who made his heart want to stay. He sighed softly, then smiled. Maybe. I've found the family I've always been missing. That evening, when Diana woke, she saw she was still carefully covered with a blanket. On the bedside table sat a fresh bowl of porridge, steaming, this time seasoned just right. Thomas was slumped by the window, head resting back, dozing. She gazed at the once cold, distant man, and her chest filled with something indescribable. Perhaps, she thought, the moment he carried her to bed, gentle as if she were a treasure, was the true turning point. Her hand brushed the warm bowl. She whispered softly, "Thank you, sir." "No, thank you, Thomas." In the dim light, Thomas's eyes flickered open. He had heard every word, and he knew. From this moment on, nothing would ever be the same. On a Monday morning, Thomas walked into the Carter Corporation office as usual. But the moment his secretary handed him that day's financial newspaper, he froze. On page 2 was a blurry photo, blurry yet clear enough. Him sitting on the grass, holding a kite, beside a woman and a little girl laughing brightly. The bold headline screamed, "Cold billionaire Carter unexpectedly seen with a mysterious little family." Thomas frowned, his icy expression immediately snapping back in place. Indeed, on that picnic day, he hadn't noticed anyone taking pictures. But the media never missed a chance to embellish a story. That afternoon, during a video call with his relatives, he heard the sharp, scolding tone, "Thomas, what on earth are you doing? The board and the press are all speculating. A housemaid. Do you realize if this spreads, it will be seen as a stain on our name?" Another relative chimed in, "Don't let personal feelings get in the way. The press exaggerates everything. You are a Carter. The family's reputation cannot be shaken by some nameless woman." Thomas fell silent. Since childhood, he had been used to harshness, used to the heavy shadow of the family and the corporation. But this time, inside him arose another voice, stronger than all the familiar pressure. He remembered that picnic, Jasmine's laughter, Diana's radiant eyes as she watched her daughter running across the grass. And even himself, he had smiled. A real smile, not a polite one, not to prove anything. How long had it been since he last felt like a normal human being? Slowly, he spoke into the screen. There are things that can't be measured by reputation or shares. You can think I'm weak, but I will not lose the most precious thing I've just found again. The other end went silent. No one dared to say another word. Meanwhile, at the mansion, Diana was scrubbing and tidying up, her mind in a state of chaos. She had heard the news. Pictures of Thomas at the picnic with her and Jasmine had spread across forums. People were buzzing, some jealous, others mocking. Even a maid can climb up to a billionaire. Diana bit her lip hard. She knew exactly who she was, a single mother with nothing but her own laboring hands. Would Thomas really have the courage to stand by her when the whole world was watching him under a microscope? When Thomas walked into the house, she hesitated, then said timidly, "Mr. Carter, if this causes trouble for you, I'll resign. I don't want to be a burden." Thomas froze, his gaze sharp for a split second, then softening. He stepped closer, his voice steady and firm. "Diana, never think of yourself as a burden. If anyone should leave, it's the gossip, not you." She looked up, her eyes brimming with tears, yet the fear still lingered. "But I'm just—" He cut her off. "You're the one who brings laughter into this house, and Jasmine, she's the light I've never had in my life." At that very moment, Jasmine came running in from the yard, hugging Thomas's leg tightly. "Uncle Thomas, I just told my friends at school that you ate Mommy's cake." Both adults froze. Diana flushed red while Thomas chuckled, ruffling the little girl's hair. "And what did your friends say?" "They said that means Uncle Thomas likes Mommy," Jasmine answered innocently, her eyes sparkling. "And I think so too. When you look at Mommy, your eyes shine." Diana turned away, heart pounding wildly. Thomas looked at the child, then at Diana, his voice deep yet warm. "Jasmine, you're smarter than most adults." In that moment, Diana could no longer deny it. What Jasmine had blurted out so naturally was the very truth she had tried to hide. Her heart had already stirred, and the man before her, even standing in the middle of a storm of public scrutiny, remained unwavering, like a wall against the wind. As night fell, Diana sat by the window, her heart still tangled in fear and hope. But this time, when she heard Thomas's footsteps approach, she didn't retreat. Standing behind her, Thomas said softly, "I don't know how hard the future will be, but one thing is certain. I won't let anyone separate me from you and Jasmine." Diana clenched her hands tightly, tears streaming down her cheeks. In the dark, she whispered, "I believe you." It wasn't just a promise of trust. It was also an acceptance of the feelings that had been quietly growing, breaking through every barrier. That afternoon, Diana received an unexpected invitation from Thomas. He appeared in the kitchen, where she was busy with a batch of pastries, his expression serious, yet slightly awkward. "Diana, tonight I have a party. Would you come with me?" She jerked her head up so quickly that the spoon in her hand nearly slipped. Me? Mr. Carter, I'm just the help. How could I possibly—" Thomas cleared his throat, avoiding her gaze as though even he wasn't used to asking anyone this sort of thing. "Not as the help. I want you by my side." The words froze Diana in place. Heat rushed to her cheeks, but in the end, she gave a small nod. When she stepped into the Grand Hotel ballroom that evening, Diana felt as if she'd wandered into another world. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead, gowns shimmered like liquid silk, and golden light danced on the surface of wine glasses. She wore a simple dress Thomas had arranged for her hair neatly pinned up. No heavy makeup, only the shy curve of her smile. For a moment, eyes lingered on her. Whispers trailed through the crowd. Who is she? She's not the type of woman Thomas usually brings. She looks so genuine. Diana's confidence faltered, but then a guest accidentally dropped a silk scarf. Without hesitation, Diana bent to pick it up, adding with a sheepish grin, "Good thing it wasn't a glass of wine, or I'd be on my hands and knees scrubbing the floor." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Her honesty and quick wit melted the stiff, formal air. An older chairwoman leaned over to Thomas and whispered, "This young woman is truly delightful." Thomas glanced at Diana, a strange warmth rising in his chest. In a world full of pretense and competition, she was like a small flame, radiating warmth without ever trying. Throughout the evening, Diana unknowingly spread smiles everywhere she went. She helped a flustered waiter balance a heavy tray, guided an elderly guest who'd lost his way in the hall, and chatted with people as if kindness was second nature. From across the room, Thomas watched quietly. Something inside him cracked open. For so long, his life had been only about power, reputation, and cold negotiations. But Diana, so innocent, so genuine, had breathed life into the entire room. And he realized he no longer wanted a world that didn't include her. When the party ended and the guests began to leave, Thomas quietly led Diana to the hotel garden, where strings of fairy lights glowed along the path. The night air was cool, carrying the faint scent of blossoms. Diana hesitated. "Thank you for tonight, but I'm sure I embarrassed you." People looked at me strangely. Thomas shook his head, his voice low and steady. "No, Diana, you lit up that room." She lowered her eyes, her heart racing faster than usual. He studied her for a long moment. His gaze held both certainty and nervousness, like a man about to do something he'd never done before. Finally, he exhaled and murmured, "I'm not good at saying these kinds of things, but I don't want you to be just the housekeeper anymore. I want a lifetime." Diana froze, certain she'd misheard. What did you say?" Thomas frowned, awkward as a schoolboy. "I mean, I want you and Jasmine to be part of my life. Not for a few days, not just a fleeting emotion. Forever." Silence settled around them. Diana's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes shimmering. She had never imagined that this cold, powerful man could speak such clumsy yet heartfelt words. She laughed softly through her tears. "Mr. Carter, I don't even know how to respond. I never thought I deserved—" He stepped closer, took her hand, his voice rough with emotion. "Don't call me Mr. Carter anymore. I'm just Thomas, and I don't need anyone else but you." Diana's body stilled. In that moment, every fear and insecurity seemed to dissolve. All she could hear was the thudding of her heart and the steady warmth of his hand around hers. Suddenly, Jasmine popped her head out from the banquet hall doorway and shouted innocently, "I knew it! Uncle Thomas likes Mommy!" Both adults burst into laughter, the tension melting away. Diana's cheeks turned crimson, while Thomas gently patted Jasmine's head, then turned back to Diana with the softest gaze she had ever seen in him. That night in the quiet garden, a clumsy yet sincere confession opened a brand new chapter for three souls who had once felt lost, but had now found each other. A year had passed since that night when Thomas awkwardly blurted out his confession under the garden lights. 1 year, but for Diana and Jasmine, it felt like a sweet, unending dream. Diana was no longer the quiet maid who silently swept floors or cooked breakfast every morning. She had become the wife of Thomas Carter, but to her that title wasn't about wealth or status. It was proof that, after all the storms, she finally had a true home. The once grand but empty mansion was now alive, like a real nest of warmth. Its long hallways no longer echoed with Thomas's solitary footsteps, but with Jasmine's giggles, the sound of piano keys as Diana practiced with her daughter, and the smell of freshly baked pastries wafting through the air each afternoon. Breakfast was no longer Thomas sitting alone at the long, cold dining table. Now he was greeted by the sight of Diana preparing simple meals, toasted bread, fried eggs, and a glass of warm milk for Jasmine. Sometimes he even tried baking himself, usually ending up with lopsided pastries that sent both mother and daughter into fits of laughter. "Daddy, is this bread or a brick?" Jasmine teased, hands on her hips, eyes sparkling mischievously. Thomas pretended to be stern, raising an eyebrow. "You dare compare the CEO's masterpiece to a brick?" Diana, pouring milk, shook her head with a laugh. If he ever opened a bakery, he'd be bankrupt in a day. Their laughter filled the kitchen, breathing life into a mansion that had once been silent and cold. One evening after a warm family dinner, Thomas received an important call. He had been awarded the title Humanitarian Entrepreneur of the Year for his contributions to the community, particularly through the scholarship fund and children's charity projects he had launched alongside Diana. On the night of the ceremony, under dazzling lights, Thomas stepped onto the stage to accept his award. The audience expected a powerful speech about business strategy and the vision of a formidable CEO. But Thomas simply smiled, took the microphone, and said, "I used to believe my greatest achievement was building a strong empire. But now I know the greatest reward of my life is my family." He paused, glancing at the front row where Diana and Jasmine were seated. Diana's radiant smile glowed back at him, while Jasmine waved her little hand high, calling out loudly, "Daddy, I'm right here." The hall erupted with laughter and applause. In that moment, Thomas was no longer the cold billionaire the world saw. He was simply a husband and a father, happy, whole. That same night back home, Jasmine sat quietly with her crayons, drawing with intense focus. When she was finished, she ran over, her eyes bright with excitement. "Mom, Dad, look!" Thomas and Diana bent down to take a look. The picture showed the three of them, but there was also a tiny baby, its hand held tightly by Jasmine. Diana froze in surprise. "Jasmine, who's this you added?" The little girl grinned, pointing at the baby. "My sibling, of course. I want a brother or sister to play with. Don't you agree?" Thomas burst out laughing, while Diana's cheeks flushed pink, but her eyes shimmered with unspoken joy. Thomas gently stroked his daughter's hair, replying tenderly, "If that's what you wish, then your mother and I will do our best to make it come true." Diana leaned shyly against her husband's shoulder, while Jasmine giggled happily, holding up her happy family drawing with 4 people. Thomas took the picture, staring at it as if it were more precious than any million-dollar painting he had ever seen. He pulled them both into his arms, his voice warm. "Thank you, Jasmine, and thank you, Diana. You've given me a home." Diana whispered softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "And thank you for giving me and my daughter a real family." The evening sunlight streamed through the wide glass windows, bathing them in a golden glow. Children's laughter echoed, the scent of pastries lingered in the air, and love filled their hearts. The once cold mansion had become a house overflowing with warmth and joy, a place where a man who had lived alone finally found the missing piece of his life. And in Jasmine's little drawing, that story would be preserved forever, of a happy family, of a love that had reached its perfect ending.